saw that as the focus. This webinar is going to focus on my beliefs about leadership and how we can lead in ways that enable us to be confident about courageous decisions that align with our values and core beliefs. And with the time we've got, it's going to be quite a quick go over of it. Now, I'm not good at this remote stuff, so I'm out of practice. So I'll do my best. I'm much better face to face. So sing out if you ever want that opportunity. And I have got some notes I'm going to be referring to, so you'll see me looking down, because it's just to resist the temptation to burble on. Let's see how successful it is. I'm now going to share my screen with you because there's a few slides I want to show you. So just wish me luck on that. Cool. I've lost sight of all you, so I didn't know that was going to happen. But can you see that screen? Hello?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Thank you.
Your slide share is up. Yeah. Excellent.
So I just want to start off by just sharing a little bit about who I am and where I've come from. No here, aho. The slide up the top there, that's 1981 in Rugby Park in Hamilton, and I invaded the park and contributed to that game being cancelled. So, why am I mentioning that? I was 23 years old. I didn't plan to invade the park, but it just happened, and I was swept along with what was going on. But when I think back to it, I think that the previous 21 years of my life had helped shape some beliefs about, some things are right and some things are wrong, and then we have to take some action on it. And, so that occurred in 1981. And I always wondered at how effective that action was because the tour went ahead. And I had the privilege of going to South Africa on a study tour, and the black African bus driver heard that I was had done that and was on the bus, so he got me to come and sit beside him, and he told me the story of his brother who had been held in a police cell, and every morning he was taken to the 7th floor and told to jump, and he wouldn't, and so as a result he'd be severely assaulted and hurled back into a cell. And after a particularly bad assault, he decided when he was back in the cell that the next day he was going to jump. But when he woke up the next day, somehow he heard the news about what had happened in Hamilton that previous or over their night. And he thought, well, if there's people on the other side of the world fighting for us, then I'm going to carry on. So, this bus driver with tears running down his eyes, telling the story, just reinforced to me that, you can take some courageous action, and it can, it's only really local, but it can have a real impact, all around the world. On the left there is the wharenui at Ngarawahia High School, Tuhinga o Ngawai. And I was a beginning teacher there, a Pākehā boy, and I became chairperson of the Ngarawahia High School Maurie Committee, and we built that wharenui with our bare hands from a converted prefab right in the middle of Kingitanga, 300 metres away from Tūranga Waiwai. And it was so great early in my career to get involved with whānau and work on a project that was really meaningful to them, and I learned heaps. And I'm really proud of that structure, that actual wharenui. But what I'm most proud of is what came out of it when those Māori parents realised that the PTA wasn't going to give them the miserable $1,500 from the workday. So they went along in a group and got themselves voted on at the AGM onto the PTA, which was quite a surprise to everybody, and got their hands on the $1,500. And what came out of that action that they took was when the boards of trustees model came in a few years later, they quite happily got onto their boards of trustees. So it was great to see that empowerment. And then one at the bottom, it's a Potiki, Kuriki Utu, the wharenui, and the Kapahaka Rōpū that's there. I was DP there for 10 years and then principal for 10 years. When I was DP there, I was in charge of discipline over 10 years. And over that 10 years, there were 8 to 10 kids every year excluded. So that's 80 to 100 kids over my time as DP. There's no other school in the town. There were 50 to 60 kids suspended. So that's 500 to 600 kids who were suspended, and the whakamā that was part of that process for their whānau. And it's in charge of discipline. I created increasingly more punitive discipline processes, ranging from lunchtime detentions to after-school detentions to Saturday school. Saturday school became really popular because the kids quite like coming along, getting some work done. But it never changed the behaviour. So when I was appointed principal, I said no one will get suspended from the school again, and no one was. The sun came up, the sun went down, the kids were naughty, but the whole atmosphere changed, and discovered restorative practice, and really delved deeply into that, and had a huge impact on the culture of that school, and achievement went right through the roof, as a result of that. So we started thinking about a relationship-based approach to behaviour management. What if we had a relationship-based approach to curriculum and pedagogy, and working with a group of aspiring leaders, of which Kelly, who registered for here, was on. We moved to a 3-period day of 100 minutes, small group learning advisories, and 3-day wānanga. So, we were able to make some real shifts based on these beliefs that, these kids had as much right to a quality education as anybody else. And out there on the right-hand side is Tiriwa. Hobsonville Point Secondary School is at the base of Te Waunui Tiriwa, the Great Forest of Tiriwa, which is the Waitakaris. And so I went there as foundation principal, and had the opportunity to help lead the design of a school which had a relationship-based approach to everything that it did, and where we set out to create a school where it was safe for adolescents to practice being adults and to get it wrong. So I'm just feeling a little bit funny because I can't see you, and I thought I would be able to, but if Darren keeps an eye on the chat, if anybody wants to stop and ask a question or whatever, they do that through Darren, that's fully okay. So here's my leadership model. It's not that complicated. It's a bit country boyish, but I didn't have it when I first started as a leader, and it's developed as I've gone on. So it's got these 3 circles: moral, purpose, courage, and open to learning, that all interact into crossover, and there's obviously a sweet spot right in the middle. And it's all 3 of these that have got to be in place, I've found, to be a really effective leader. Because if you've got moral purpose without courage, you'd be like many of those principals who used to visit Hobsonville Point Secondary School, who would say, hey, a lot of the stuff that you're doing here, we'd like to do that, but our staff won't let us, or our parent community won't let us. And that to me is an example of knowing what the right thing is, but not actually having the courage to do it. And conversely, just having courage without a moral purpose, can be fairly dangerous. You'd have a leader charging off courageously in any direction, following no compass direction or coherent vision. And it's just confusing for people who you want to follow you. And even, when we do have the courage to take action based on our moral purpose, we always have to be open to the possibility that we might be wrong, that others will have ideas that we need to consider in shaping our strategy and our actions. So that's the model. And what I'm going to do is just deal each of those circles, mainly with the moral purpose one, and then touch a little bit on the courage and the open to learning. So, I'll go back one. What's meant by this? Think about what it is that drives you the most in your leadership, what you'll die in the ditch for, what stands the hair up on the back of your neck, what puts the sparkle in your eyes as a leader. I'm utterly convinced of the importance of knowing what this is for you. There's no right or wrong answer, but whatever it is, it will drive your decision making. So I have had a couple of trips to the US where I visited schools, and I met one principal over there who was unashamedly focused on having his school have the top test scores in the district. So that was his driving purpose. I've come across a principal in Aotearoa, New Zealand, who's driven by the fact that he's not going to give up on any student. I'll give up on no student is something that he often says. If we think about these two, we can easily imagine what each of their schools feel like, sound like, and look like. We can get a good idea about how each of those schools are structured, how time's allocated, how leadership is structured throughout the school, what assessment and reporting would look like, what the strategic plan looks like, and even what prize givings would be like. You might also be able to imagine how each of those principals would react to a staff member suggestion to incorporate extracurricular type activities more into the normal curriculum time of the school. They'd have quite a different view of it, I would imagine. And this is why understanding your why is so important, because it actually drives a lot of the decision making in the school. So I want to ask you, what is your moral purpose? What is your why? What gets you going as a leader that you really don't want to give up on? What gets you going to work? So I'm just going to give you 60 seconds to think about that and try to capture it in as few words as possible. Even one word would be really cool, but just to think about for you as a leader, what it is your why, what drives you. And while you do that, I'm going to try and reshare it so that I can see you. Anybody want to share what they've got? We can be a small enough group that we just sort of say it.
I'll maybe just share mine. I've written down doing all I can to equip others for success.
Cool. So trying to get that down to less words might be something like empower others or something along those lines.
It's interesting. I've played with the word empower and equip, and I've realised I actually equip rather than empower. So there's a difference.
Excellent.
So, so be equip others for success is the shorter version of that.
Cool. Anyone else?
I'm looking, I can't put it into 2 words. The 2 words would be valued and opportunities, but students feeling valued and having maximum opportunities is my goal.
Cool. And one more?
Mine's a little different from the area I come from, and I can't narrow it down enough at the moment, but it's something about equipping emerging kaiako pitamata, so emerging student teachers, okay, and something around supporting our sector, like working for our sector, like, that just the whole heart in our sector, doing that with our sector in mind. Okay, cool. In some of the other workshops that I've done, which have been exclusively with actual practicing principals, and I think we've only got a handful here right now, they come up with things like learner agency, equity, relationships at the centre, connected learning, those sorts of things as well. And so when I workshop with them, those are the things that we tend to concentrate on. I've lost control of the
my screen share, so I'm just going to bring it back again and disappear. I'll get you. Do you see me when we're sharing? Okay, it's just okay. It's just my end. Okay. Well, so just bear with me for a sec. Cool. Right. So hopefully you've all got something similar to what you've just heard. But what we've got to do is we've got to take that that sort of core value that you have, and we've got to turn it into a belief statement. And you know that's done with this sentence stem that I've been using, which is I value whatever that thing is because I believe. And obviously with school leaders, it's going to be some belief around the impact it has on, you know, success for kids and staff at school. I value something because I believe. And so from a previous workshop that I've run, this is one who valued equity. So this is the example they gave. I value equity because I believe that every learner has the right to a successful education and to bring who they are to the learning. So that's an example. What I want you to do is to take your one and see if you can turn that into a belief statement for you that explains why you value that thing. Sing out if it's not clear. So we're not needing to get this 100% right, obviously, right now. We're just workshopping. So I'll just give you 30 seconds and then let's see if we can get a couple of them shared. Cool. So understanding I can't see anybody, so I think someone just starts talking. Anyone like to share their go at a belief statement around their value?
I believe. Sorry again. I value communicate because I believe it is all about people.
Cool. Yep. Can we get one more? 3, 2.
Janine, you're on mute if you're. There we go.
Sorry. I value capacity building because I can believe that everybody can be better and it's our opportunity to grow them.
Excellent. So they're both really cool belief statements. So based on that, identifying a core value and then turning into a belief statement, I want to introduce you to the circles framework here, which many of you might have seen. It's the key tool that I've been using in my decision making for the last 10 years. Many of you will have come across this framework either through working with Julie Aitken or have come across them through Simon Sinek, where they've come to be known as Sinek circles. I prefer to engage with the framework through Julia's lens because I've had the opportunity to be involved in workshops with her. So it's just these 3 concentric circles, starting with the why, moving out to the how, and moving then to the what. The why is this core value and belief. The how is she describes them as principles. I prefer to use the term guidelines for action, what's going to guide the action that we're going to take as a result of that core value, and then working out to the practices. It's my view that when we are clear on our core beliefs and values, that what we're going to die in the ditch for, and why we believe that, that's our belief statement, then we can act confidently and courageously as we lead. But we must always start in the centre. Then we move to the second circle to decide what principles or guidelines for action, or the how, which will determine how we'll practice and respond. And too often we want to jump quickly, or we feel pressured to jump quickly to the solutions or the practices or the what. You know, I'll go to a number of workshops in schools, and people will want to know what the answer is right from the beginning. And there's often some frustration when you take them through from the centre circle to the outside, but then they understand. It's the wrong way to approach decision making, is to go straight to the what. We should be driven by what we value and what we believe. So we must always start in the centre circle and work our way out. We should set goals and be driven by what we value and what we believe. Now, if we were sitting together in a workshop, I'd get you to write the word from that previous exercise, your core value, write it in the centre, and then on a space under the circle, you'd write the I value such and such because as your belief statement. And when we would then move to the principles or guidelines for action in the second circle. And these are derived from the values and beliefs being focused on, and give guidance to the practices we'll adopt. And we've got to do that before we look at the practices. And a lot of people struggle with the principles or the guidelines for action bit. And I've found using this sentence stem helps to come up with what the principles could be. Because I value or believe in this thing, I'll make sure my practice includes, allows for, or is driven by, and they become your guidelines for action. And when those the two middle circles have been settled on, and only then we can look at the practices, the what. And this will mean that what you decide on as your practice, strategy, or solution will be linked to your core beliefs. So here's an example of one that I've sort of hurriedly brought together based on some work that I've done with some other schools. So in this case, the core value is equity. You can see the belief statement at the bottom. I value equity because I believe that every learner has the right to a successful education and to bring who they are to the learning. And then there's got three guidelines for action or principles there. So I'll not give up on any student. I'll celebrate and recognise the full diversity of my school community. I'll seek alternative pathways to success. So those are just three. There'd be many, many more, and some quite different ones. But if this was myself, I'd be looking at that. I'd be developing those guidelines for actions. Then I'll say, okay, what does that mean my practices will be? So not giving up on any student, be no suspensions. Or I'd devote professional learning in my school to making sure that all kids get personalised feed forward in our pedagogy, so that every kid knows what their next steps are. I'll celebrate and recognise the full diversity of my school community. So I'll make sure if I've got a uniform, it's non-gendered. Maybe I'll look at opening a Muslim prayer room if this is what some of the students are wanting. I'll certainly be celebrating Pride Week. And I'll seek alternative pathways to success. So therefore, I'll be looking at an internship program for kids who aren't going on an academic pathway. I'll be making sure that differentiated learning and learning around universal design for learning would be a real focus of our professional learning, so that we can find success for all students. And it's also a good model for checking alignment of existing practices. Often when I'm working with schools and staff and they put in these values at the centre and they're looking at what the practice will be, I ask them to just dump a lot of their current practices around the outside of the circles, and they see that some of their practices that they're really heavily invested in actually don't align with any core value or belief. So my challenge to them is to think about, is that practice worth hanging on to? if it doesn't align with their core values and beliefs. It's also a great tool for you as a leader to use to explore your own core beliefs to drive your decision making. But it's also the best tool I've seen to use with curriculum leaders or whole staff to develop a common understanding about key elements of your pedagogy. You know, you imagine sitting around with a group of curriculum leaders or even your whole staff, and they've determined that learning should be collaborative or connected, or relationships should be at the centre, or learning should be authentic, or we should be concentrating on learner agency. So you put that, whatever it is, in the middle, and then work on the belief statement, because co-constructing the belief statement gets people exploring why that element is important, rather than just being the next fad off the rank. And then when the teams develop the principles or guidelines for action collectively, it means that when practices are decided on, there's more likely to be general agreement with and commitment to them. You know, how often do we roll out practices for staff to follow and then be disappointed in the uptake? You know, it's mainly because they haven't understood the core value and the guiding principles that resulted in these practices. And then it also allows us to talk with staff who may not be using the practices we agreed on, by returning to the core belief and values that drive those practices. You know, it's much more useful than talking to a teacher and expressing your disappointment that they're not following a practice that you thought everybody agreed on. You know, it's much more useful to have a conversation along the lines of, hey, you know, we're into relationships here, and we all agreed that and we believe we value relationships because we know that students are more likely to be engaged with their learning if they have a strong positive relationship with their teacher and with their kids. So you've just blurted out the belief statement. And that one of the practices we agreed on based on that that value was that we would start each particular learning episode with a purahita or a circle, and we would sit around in a circle and hear student voice around about what they've previously learned about this topic, where they like to go with it, etc., etc. And I've noticed that you haven't been doing that. It's a much better way to have that conversation, because it comes back to things that people have been involved in constructing right from a core belief, a core value. So I'm just going to pause there. I think I'm about to join you. And so I've just given quite a quick run through quite a simple looking framework, but which I think is you know, extremely powerful, and I've found really useful, both at a personal level, both at a departmental or a whole school level, and also not thinking about just the core belief for myself or what learning will look like, but when a school's wanting to look at strategic planning and casting forward, revisiting its whole charter, and to come back, you know, for the board to come back using those circles, you know, what are the core things that we value in our school, and they developing some guiding principles and some practices for them to support it in a school is really useful as well. So I'm interested in some feedback. Has anyone? Oh,
I am. I'm just blown away a little bit. I've been following Simon Singh for quite a while, and I love the start with why framework, but I've never seen it applied to those difficult conversations as a way to sit down and just take the heat out of those confrontational kind of conversations and into something that's value based and value driven. I just think it's amazing. So thank you for sharing it.
Yeah, you know, school leaders are anxious and nervous about those difficult conversations, and you know, I must admit, you know, the best professional learning I ever did was Viviane Robinson's Open to Learning conversations, and that, you know, really helped me have those conversations. But then this sort of meshing in and with it as well really turns those conversations away to I have noticed a misalignment between what I believed were co-constructed and agreed core beliefs, which resulted in these practices. I've noticed this with you. Tell me about that and how you think it aligns with that. Because you're actually trying to get them to say, well, you're not trying to get them to say, but I don't believe in strong relationships, or I don't believe in equity. That's why I do this thing. And it's really hard for someone to actually argue that. And so in most cases, they actually see, oh, yeah, I can commit to a belief, I can commit to a value, and I can see how this might be seen as not aligning. So thanks for that, Paula.
I've got some curiosities around the process of co-constructing a value, and how you navigate a difference in value when I think about distributive leadership and a shared value. How have you managed, or how might you manage that?
Right. It's really interesting because I'm currently working with quite a big school right now on this, really trying to determine what is going to be the pedagogy of their school. And I've been working 6 months now just with the senior leadership team. And I'm meeting up with them again next week. But in that 6 months, and I've only met with them 3 times in that 6 months, and they've had homework to do, they have settled on what they believe are the key values around pedagogy for their context. They've settled on these 5. They've turned them into belief statements, and they've gathered a small sample of research to show why that thing is important. They have played around with guidelines for action and practices, but I've told them, this is just a play around because you aren't really going to be determining these. So the next step is that they're going to meet with all of their middle leaders, and they are going to sell to them these 5 pedagogical beliefs, values. So they're set in pretty strong concrete, based on their knowledge of the school and their people and their context. They haven't just brought them in from outside. And then even though they have created their own belief statement already, they're not going to share those. They're going to construct with those head of faculties a belief statement, and then work with them on, so what could the guidelines of actions be, and what might some practices be? But say to them as well, the guidelines for action and the practices are in fairly wet concrete right now, because what's the next step? Once they've got their head around it, then we're going to take it to the whole staff. And then they are going to sell to their whole staff these 4 core beliefs about pedagogy. And the staff in groups are going to create belief statements. And obviously the heads of faculties who have been through this process in SLT will, bring their statements, sitting inside their own head and sort of see where things go. And then the staff will create the guidelines for actions from that. So what does that mean? What sorts of principles will we now operate under? And then move to, so what will some of the practices look like? At the same time, or through the same process, not necessarily at the same time, the staff will be invited to also look for other practices that don't align, that they might want to relinquish, because we can't keep filling the bucket up. We've got to look for taking some things away as well. So it's going to be an 18-month process, that, and just running parallel to that is a student voice collection around the same sorts of thing. And at each one of those meetings I talked about, then the student voice is reflected in as well. So that's how we're going to do that. So it's like giving the leaders the responsibility and the accountability to determine what those core values are around, in this case, it's pedagogy.
Sorry.
I was going to see, did that help? Did that give some sort of...
Yeah, I think it's this has been quite helpful for me, because I can see that a current decision that we're working through at the moment, because we don't have shared values necessarily, but I think possibly I have a strong value around something, and somebody else has a different value set and they don't necessarily align. So I'm curious about how we might maybe start at the beginning and co-construct some values so that decision is, it's just.
Yeah, and it was interesting in the school I'm working with when we settled on this 5, because they came up with 12, or 12 or 13 of these things, and the way they were tested was by working on the belief statement. So, if they really wanted to die in the ditch about this thing, this was important to them, they had to have a belief statement about it attached to teaching and learning that they could sell to the rest of the team. And so it was those 3 meetings I've had with them that then got them grouped down to those 5. So it's, you might have this view, this other person got this other view, testing their belief statement around it in relation to teaching and learning or leading or whatever your focus is can help with that.
Maurie, how do you maintain momentum over time? Like, I've seen a number of schools engaged in processes like this, and there's a lot of energy and excitement involved in this sort of thing, and that will be maintained over a period of time, and then new staff come in over time as well. The busyness of schools, things sometimes get weighed down and lost. How do you make sure it's deeply embedded and it just is maintained?
Yeah, so you've described the journey I went through actually at Hobsonville Point. I woke up one day about 6 years in and thought, there's some misalignment here. All that cool stuff we did where we settled on this and we created these practices, and everybody, because they co-constructed the principles and the values, and we created these practices and we're following them, it just doesn't seem as tight. I'm having to have a few more of these conversations. And I did this exercise where I said to the staff, stand up if you were appointed in 2012 or 13. And I suddenly realized that more than half the staff had been appointed in the last couple of 3 years, and there were so few of those original staff left. So that was a reminder to me that we had to go right back into the whakapapa of that story to go through it again. What I'm wished I had done, and which I'm advising the schools I'm working with to do, is to prioritize the pedagogies that they want to be working on over a period of time, and devote their enough professional learning time, because they've got other things they need to do, to actually bring the circles out on the bits of papers in the circles with all the staff, with the kids who've provided the student voice, and to revisit in a cyclical way. It's easy out of the mess of the school for me to be suggesting that, but it's something that I wish I had followed myself. And it was quite interesting in the Hobsonville Point experience. We'd get to a tricky thing a few years in, and I remember one of my staff members, Danielle, said, "Why don't we get the bloody circles out?" And so we did that, and this issue that we've been grappling with was one that then we were able to work through, because we started from the beliefs, our core values. And I suppose perhaps I'll jump to that NCA level 1 thing, because I think, well, no, I'll wait for feedback first. If there's any other questions.
I was just going to add that I think what you're talking about with the staff, where you're able to have those conversations, where you are able to ask, how does that align with kind of the beliefs and the values, also is a great way to avoid assumptions, because I was a middle leader, but we're not well trained as middle leaders, to be fair. Like there's, sometimes you just put there because you were doing an okay job and you seem like an okay person, so you can jump in there and lead, but you actually don't necessarily have the tools to have those difficult conversations. And that's a lovely way to avoid that assumption, I think, because I think sometimes we do that well with students, but sometimes we don't. It's not always well reversed with colleagues, or we're not always maybe as willing sometimes to look at it ourselves. And so, yeah, it was just a lovely question too.
Yeah.
Questioned well for that, I thought.
What you've done there, Carla, is you jumped straight into that circle of mine about open to learning. Which was of those 3 circles, was the toughest one for me, because I've never liked to be wrong, and You know, I'm a baby boomer, so if I'm the leader, I've got to be in charge. I've got to know the answers, you know, and you know, the first half of my leadership journey was wasted with that mindset. Yeah, so you've captured that circle really well. I'm just going to throw up a couple more slides, and then yeah, do this, and then briefly talk about a couple other things, and then I think we'll just have a chat. Cool, we got that? Someone say yes?
Yes, we do.
Oh, okay. Just really briefly on courage. It's that top point there is what I've already said, but what I've found is the courage comes in with the second point. Once you've got real clarity around what you value, and you know why you value that's your belief statement. You know what you're going to die in the ditch for. That gives us the courage to take action. And I think, you know, really concentrating on what it is that drives you, that what you're determined to bring about, and having a real clear understanding of why that's important, why you believe it, that gives you the courage to take action. You know, you can, whenever you're challenged around the decisions that you're making that is based on your values, you can always fall back onto your belief statements, which you might turn into elevator statements, which are your brief and continual messages that focuses on the why. You know, when I was getting hit with staff, it's about why do we devote so much of our time in our timetable to our learning hubs, which is our sort of dispositional small group learning advisory model. You know, just made me realize that we need to go back and focus. Well, we value relationships. We really believe that every student needs at least one warm and demanding adult to look out for them. So when I started talking like that with that person, or it might have been a couple of them, when I started talking about that value, they're reminded of that value, and in most cases say, oh yeah, right, I understand. So it's that ability to, you know, to fall back onto those belief statements and remind people of the values can help things move forward. And then the open to learning, the open to learning one, you know, as I said, the best PL I did was Viviane Robinson's work around open to learning conversations. And it not only opened my mind up to the fact that when I'm having to have a difficult conversation with a staff member, a parent or a student, it reminded me that I might be wrong. My view might be wrong. And the whole purpose of the conversation is to explore and test my view with the other person before looking for a way to move forward. And, you know, it's just so powerful that I started to not fear so much having those difficult conversations. And I would go in and say, look, I've noticed such and such and such. It's made me think this, but I could be wrong. Could you please tell me about it? And just putting in that statement, I could be wrong, tell me about it, just changes the whole focus of the conversation. And it shows that you're open to learning. It's a real challenge because you've got to avoid that tendency that you have as a leader to go in with, you know what the problem is, and you've got the solution for it before you even go into that conversation. So it's got to be quite self-disciplined to sort of throw that out of your head. But it's also reminded me of the reality that in my leadership role, some of my assumptions about what we need to do may well be wrong, and they need to be tested. So I'm not saying that your core belief and your core values will be wrong, but perhaps some of the guidelines for actions, but definitely some of the practices to bring it to life might not be the best thing, and we need to listen to others. And that's similar to what sorry, I haven't got people in front of me that someone was speaking about. I was going to talk about this, but I'm not sure if I will now. This captures how it happened at Hobsonville Point Secondary School. Perhaps I'll just do a real quick touch on it of how basing things on a core, in this case, a vision, and then working outwards, you come to a range of practices. So up the top, there's the vision, and it's just a collection of words. But I really love that last half about empowering learners to contribute confidently and responsibly in our changing world, because it describes the graduate that we want. And as soon as we have a look at the graduate that we want, we suddenly realise that you can't just have top academic kids, because the best academic kid in the world might not care about making the world better. So therefore we would have not achieved our vision. So that's why we decided these two pathways of excellence, academic and personal. We used to argue that they were equal, but definitely during the COVID experience, we realized that the personal excellence was more important than the academic excellence. You get that right, then to a certain extent, the academic side looks after itself. And so academic one was easy. It was, there's a framework, a curriculum framework, a qualifications framework, but we couldn't find anything around the personal side. So we developed these things in the bottom right-hand corner called Hobsonville habits. We found if our kids were strong and being adventurous and compassionate and responsive and curious, then they would be developing the right disposition so that they could contribute confidently and responsibly in our changing world. And like all schools, we had a mission: innovate, engage, and inspire, but we just didn't want them to be just words. So we converted them into principles. We would innovate in a secondary school by personalising learning, because in most cases it's a one-size-fits-all model. We'd engage our kids through powerful partnerships, because if we can connect their learning to the real world, it gives it authenticity and they're more likely to be engaged. And we would inspire kids through learning that involved deep challenge and inquiry. In my 40 years, I haven't seen any kid inspired by chasing credits. They might be inspired to get more credits. That might be the inspiration, but I don't put that at a very deep level. But every kid I've come across in that time does get inspired when they get an opportunity to delve deeply into, matters of interest to them, and to find out more about the stuff that's relevant to their lives. So, when we're making decisions about what to do, we'd make sure we'd follow those principles. And then we'd have these values like every school would have. But again, we didn't want them just to be sitting on the wall. So when we developed our project learning, which happens on a Wednesday, it aligns with engage through powerful partnerships, because you can't do a project unless it's connected to someone in the community, down the street or the other side of the world, and that you're solving a problem for them. And the only assessment we did of our projects was our values. How strong was I in my inquiry? How much connectedness did I display? How collaborative was I? How innovative was my process and my outcome? And how excellent overall was my process and my outcome? So we, wanted to make sure that we brought them to life. And a real clear example of how all of this drives institutions in the school would be prize giving. I've been to lots of prize givings in my time, and it says hundreds of kids sitting there and they watch first in English go across the stage, and first in maths go across the stage, first in science go across the stage. And 95% of the kids sitting in the audience know no matter how hard they work, they'll never get that prize. And it tells them a lot about what the school really values. So if we were a school that was valuing both academic and personal, we had to do something quite differently. So our prize givings have none of that. First level of prizes is the Hobsonville habits. Who's been the most adventurous? Who's been the most creative? Who's been the most resilient? Who's been the most compassionate? And every kid sitting there sees someone go across and they hear the kōrero about their story, and they think, wow, I could be the most compassionate kid. I could be the most resilient. And then the next layer of prizes were around the 4 of those values: inquiry, connectedness, collaboration, and innovation. So, who was the strongest inquirer across everything they did in the school, et cetera, et cetera. And then excellence prizes at the top. Academic excellence is like a ducks. Personal excellence, who's been the strongest in the values and the habits. And then the overall excellence across the top of that, which is who's been the strongest in both the habits and values and their academic work. So it just shows you how by working from what you believe in the center of that circle, you can come out, it should drive how you design your practices, how you design your learning, and also those big institutional practices like prize givings. And just briefly to touch on how we use this model to make our decision around NCA. When we were into our second year and we had year 9s and year 10s now, and we're about to go into year 11, we were just about innovated out. We were really tired about battling the community around bringing them on board with the innovative stuff that we were doing. And we nearly made the decision to just go with NCA like every other school. But I remember slapping my hand on the desk in the SLT room and going up to where we had our principals, and I said, look at this deep challenge and inquiry. We're into deep learning. You know, we can't be serious about that if we're exposing all of our 14 and 15-year-olds to 120 plus level 1 credits for a qualification that's got no currency. You know, it doesn't lead to a job. You don't need it for level 2 or 3, doesn't get you into tertiary. In fact, all it does is negative stuff. It turns kids into credit chasers and credit counters, and never mind, that's worth no credit, so I won't do it. It overloads teachers with moderation of tasks and moderation of activities for, you know, a qualification that has no value. And so we explored, we decided to put some beliefs in the middle about what we think were important. So deep learning meant we'd focus on learning rather than assessment. So natural consequence was, oh, we don't need to do NCA level 1. We were really determined to do our best to look after staff wellbeing, because they're our most important resource. So, you know, guiding practice we were following was we will always look for ways to reduce workload. So, right, let's remove NCA level 1 as a year 11 qualification. And then most importantly, we'll look for ways to reduce stress for our learners. That was why we went to that remove NCA as a year 11 qualification. You know, and you know, it was a battle to get it through our community. We had 110 year 10 kids. We had 130 parents at the evening that we were running to explain the decisions that we were making. We started off with a bit of an explanation around NCA, and then we started talking about why we weren't going to offer it, and we weren't, and what programs we'd be running instead. And you know, there's quite a bit of concern, but as soon as we started talking about student wellbeing and our belief in looking after student wellbeing, we won the parents round one by one. You could see it happening right across the seating where they were sitting, because parents started to say, oh yeah, you're right, my oldest daughter went to such and such a school, and by the end of year 11 she was stressed out, you know, wanted to leave school during year 12, and all those sort of stories started coming up, and it just swung people around. And it was because we really stuck to this core belief, and we shared it with our whānau about you know, why we believed it. It gave us the courage to stick with that decision. And just a brief word from the sponsor. That's me. And I looked through the comments that people had put into the sheet, the registration sheet, and there's quite a lot of mention about leadership for change. And Sarah Jane also talked about how to get the community to walk alongside, and Carla mentioned school leadership from a mentorship perspective. They were some of the things that came up. Just so to conclude before I respond to any questions, you know, I believe strongly that leadership for change requires a clear understanding of the values and beliefs that the change is based on, and time must be spent on gaining this clarity and buy-in. Most of the roadblocks potentially in the way of change disappear when there's a collective understanding and commitment to the values that are driving the change, and that this gives you the courage to lead. Of course, you need a change model to guide you, but that's another whole workshop. As far as gaining community engagement is concerned, the more we bring our community, and not forgetting our students, into an understanding of the values and beliefs that drive us, the more likely they will come on board. And so that was the example I used around that NCA, was that sticking to that core belief that they could understand, that allowed them to accept the decision that we were making. And speaking to Carla's point about mentorship for school leaders, I'd simply say this is vital. The most rewarding work I'm currently doing in collaboration with Derek Wemouth is our Refresh, Reconnect, Refocus program. We're currently piloting with 14 primary secondary principals. We had a 2-day retreat where we focused on our why and looked at change processes. They're now participating in a 20-week remote coaching program and will conclude with a day's celebration. And we're about to pilot a similar program for APs and DPs. And the feedback on this approach, which focuses on connection and mentoring, has been so powerful that we'll be offering it to principals and APs and DPs with opportunities next year to participate. We've even had interest from Australia. So watch the space if you're interested in delving more deeply into this sort of stuff and doing it in a way in which you are connected with other like-minded people, which I think is really important as we do this demanding work. That's enough from the sponsor. Any questions from those who are left? A few disappeared while I was looking the other way. Questions or comments? Cool. Been a long day. Shall I finish with karakia, Darren?
Go for it. Just before you do, Maurie, just from my own perspective on it, I'd like, is everyone here happy with, because it has been recorded, are you happy to have this distributed to others? Is anyone uncomfortable with that? You feel free to email me, because I see a lot of worth in what Maurie's covered here. It's been interesting for me from our own perspective. Ken and Sue probably found it because NetNZ is 10 years old, so I was sort of going, and so this whole idea of moral purpose and the clarity of the model has been really useful. I've been actually just thinking about, okay, how could we use this and do this with our staff going forward? And I think even though there's a small number of us, I'm sure we've all really benefited from the time. So I really appreciate the kōrero, the opportunity and how you've approached it. The small number is actually quite good in many ways. But thank you, Maurie.
Yeah, cool. Me ino e tātou, unuhia ki te uru tapu nui, kia wātia, kia māmā tānākau, te tinana, te wairua, ki te ara tangata. Koe rā e rongo, whakaarihira ake ki runga, kia tina, tina hui e, tai ki e.